I'd like to call this work session of the Judson Board of Trustees to order at 6 p.m. or 1800 hours. Thank you for taking time to be with us at this very important meeting. I do extend a sincere welcome from the entire school board. I will establish a quorum and call roll. So, Ms. Canoyer?
Suzanne Canoyer, present.
Ms. Ryan?
Ms. Ryan, present.
Ms. King?
Shatanya King, present.
Ms. Eaton?
Deborah Eaton, present.
Ms. Stanford?
Laura Stanford, present.
And Jose Macias is present. And now, Dr. Fields.
Yes, sir. Good evening.
I'd like to actually start by, we have one citizen to be heard, so I'd like to get our citizen and employee up. It's Ms. Fressy Molina. If you'd like to come up, Ms. Molina.
Hello, hello. Sorry. Good evening, board members and Dr. Field. My name is Fressy Molina, and I am proud member of Judson AFT. I am the head custodian at Candlewood Elementary School. I have proudly served the district for 9 years. I love my district, I love my kids, and I love my job. Even though you have seen me here many times, and I'm coming here tonight again to ask you, before you approve the compensation plan and budget on Thursday, to please consider the lead custodians in elementary schools. There is very little difference between the pay of the head custodians and the new custodians or custodians coming to the district with experience. Many times the experience is not on the schools. The lead custodians are still train those folks, while they are making nearly as much as the lead custodians. I would like to thank you for giving us the 3% raise. Also to remind you that our insurance costs have gone up every year. Please consider giving us a raise to help with the health care costs and raising inflation. And summer is a very hard time for us to do our job, right? Thank you for your time, and I appreciate that.
All right, Dr. Fields, we'll go ahead and start the budget discussion with the amendments to the approved compensation plan.
Yes, sir. Based on our last meeting that we had, we wanted to, again, go over our budget planning timeline. This would be the last meeting before our hearing, and it being placed on the board for the 22nd, which will be Thursday. We also wanted to cover the number of days that we spoke about before for the cabinet, and we have some updated information concerning that. We did bring compensation plan amendments. We saw that there were some concerns with the compensation plan, so we felt like if we were going to address it, there are some things that we see that we want to reconsider as well. So we'll give a recommendation on those, and then we want to go over the social emotional learning update. A request was made about what had happened to some of the funds there, or what are we doing to support those endeavors next year financially. And then we just wanted to go over district budget updates as they are as of today, or what we project for the end of the month. So I will turn it over to Ms. Davis and allow her to move through the timeline.
Hi, good afternoon. How's everybody? So today, we're just going to go through the amendments. We're going to focus on the amendments and some of the questions that were asked previously, specifically regarding SEL. So we have prepared a presentation for you, and we're just going to go straight through that presentation to ensure that we're covering each line item. And if there are any questions, I'm going to ask you to please go ahead and ask at that moment. So we are going to start with where we're at the budget planning timeline for 23-24. Today, it's currently June 20th, so this is the 5th budget workshop. We didn't originally have it scheduled, but due to some questions regarding the compensation plan, we've added that, and hopefully we'll be able to address all of the questions tonight. So we're also bringing those amendments. On June 22nd, at 5:45, we will conduct our actual public hearing and board meeting to approve the final 2022-23 budget amendment and then approve the budget moving forward. And then we receive our actual certified values on July 25th. And then on August 1st, we provide those values and that information to TEA. On August 6th, they provide TA to provide the Tier 1 M&O tax rate to us. And then on August 18th, on that board meeting, we are hoping to bring adopt the tax rate by our board. And so one of the questions that I know has come up, if you turn to your next slide, slide number 4. So we're going to go through what we currently have and some of the amendments that we are proposing. Currently in the compensation plan, we have employees that work in central office that are 220-day employees. That's what they're listed on their calendar. But in reality, I wanted to show you, if you look at the table that's to your left on that slide, even though they're called 220 employees, the days that they actually work actually exceed 220 days. And so, for example, in 2021, 220 employees really worked for 228 days, and they were provided non-duty days or vacation days for a total of 10. In 2022 school year, the 220 employees actually worked 229 days and were provided non-duty vacation days. The way that we are set up for next school year, employees who are 220 days will actually work a total of 226 days, and they will be provided 7 non-duty days. So that makes up for the days that they're asked to work beyond the 220. And so what we're proposing for next year for those employees is to actually move them to a 226 calendar schedule, because that is usually the amount of days worked. Sometimes there are a few more, but it's usually not any less. So what we're proposing is to actually pay the employees for the amount of days that they actually work.
All of this was in response to this statement that was made about the cabinet level going to 230. And in looking at it, we knew that they had worked the 228, they had worked the 229. And again, as I expressed in the last meeting, they're always here. But as we looked around, it's the principals too. It's central office staff. It's everyone. So I met with cabinet and they said, well, we don't want anything that anybody else isn't getting. So we went back and said, hey, an amendment could be everybody go to 226. Rarely do the days dip below 226. Oftentimes they go up, they typically don't go down. That would give individuals an opportunity to be compensated for the number of days that they actually work, and not given non-work days to go back and then take a day off and not be compensated. Because what we found is that at the end of November, because if you don't use it by December, then the days go away. And oftentimes it's a ghost town right after Thanksgiving, because people are just sitting at home because they don't want to lose advantage for having the day off. So everybody takes them at the same time. And this, again, would allow people to be compensated for the days that they work as opposed to indirectly. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that is one of the proposals that we're bringing to you tonight, board members. And so you can see on the right-hand side, this would affect the 12-month employees that are currently on a 220-day work schedule that start in July 1st and that end on June 30th. So we're proposing that they work the 226 days. Currently, they have 7 non-duty days. The way that would work for next school year is if we're going to actually pay them for those additional days' work, then they would only receive 1 non-duty day. But keep in mind that all of the employees receive state days that they can take, as well as local sick days that are given every year. So those do not go away. Those are still available for use. And we would allow our employees to use them. We just actually want to pay them for the days that they're actually working. We had that conversation with our employees that are in 220. I know we've also had that conversation with principals, and it was a strong consensus that people want to get paid for the days that they actually work. And so that being said, the cost to that amendment would be $586,000 for a total of about 314 positions. And so you can find those calendars online. You can also see the work schedules on the intranet as well. And so that's one piece that we're proposing for you tonight.
Well, we can go back to that, Ms. Davis. I'm going to stop here so that we can ask questions as we're going through it and not go through a lot of slides, that we're really focused on this particular one. And so my question would be, of the 7 non-duty days, I've been also informed that employees didn't take their non-duty days. They left a lot of them on the table, so they were actually working the days and never replacing it. So is there an idea of what that looked like? Of the 7 days, what's the average? 50% of the employees used all 7? Is there an idea of what was utilized?
I can tell you that many of the employees in central office did not use that, but I can give you the specific number.
And just a roundabout, we don't need the exact detail, but the idea is this. I've always maintained personally that our cabinet and our employees, they work very hard, and they should work the amount of days that we have them under contract and not more. So I would like to evaluate why we're working more when we're only being paid for 220 and we have to be here for 226. It's the reverse. You know, we don't give gifts of public funds, but yet we're forcing folks to come in and work and truly not get compensated for it. So there is a work-life balance that I think we should evaluate for our employees so they take extra time off. They're not getting paid for the days, why don't we take it off? So it's just a fundamental question I have about why we have forced employees, and I'll say forced because they still have to come in, right? It's not like, you can come in if you want to. They're also on the calendar, they got to come in.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about that.
So we've created the 220 schedule. Nearby districts mostly have year-round employees at 226 because that is the standard of a central office position job. And related to work-life balance, that is what the job responsibility calls for, right? So if you are a principal and you have to hire people, whether or not you are provided 226 or 220, you're going to come and hire people. Whether or not we, cabinet, if there's an emergency, whether or not I'm on a day off or not, I'm gonna have to come in and work. So there is that work-life balance, but there's also the responsibility of what the duty calls for. And in such cases, the standard is, within a regular calendar year, about 226. If you recall, was it last year or 2 years ago, we were working that many
226.
days because that is what the job calls for, and it was reduced to 220. So it's not like those days weren't available. That is what our employees used to work. 226, but it was a couple of years ago,
The
2
date,
years ago, that it was shifted to 220 days. But the number of days that we actually worked remained the same.
I would say that the days fluctuate for various reasons. If it's a leap year, you're going to have an extra day in. We're not going to change the calendar to 221. We're going to leave it at 220, and then you get another day of non-work day that you can take off to make up for the extra day that you have to work. When we set up our calendar, days fluctuate as well. So it's not always 226. As you can see from the slide previously, it was 228, then it went to 229. So the district used to be at 226 for whatever reason, central office staff, hourly as well as professional were changed to 220. And then we were given extra non-work days to compensate for those extra days. If you work 229, you got 9 days plus whatever, what is it?
Paid
Paid
holidays,
holidays. So 2 more, that was 11. That's how we got to the 11 days that they're saying you need to take. We were saying you need to take those days off throughout the course of the instructional year. People don't, I mean, at certain levels, it's hard to get away. And it's difficult for them to take that time, especially to the tune of 11 days if you're the campus principal. So what happens is you wait, and then someone comes back and says, hey, you haven't taken all 11 of your days. And if you don't take them by December 1st, you lose them. So then they take the next week off. And we see that a lot.
Are there any other questions from my colleagues?
So this chart that you guys have for us on here are basically the actual number of days that you guys worked?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay.
Everybody on 220, not just people around this table, but all central office.
All
Okay.
central office,
20.
the 300
Yeah.
employees.
Okay. And then those are the
And principals,
principals and, okay.
yeah.
And you guys are proposing the 226 with the one?
So next year it works out to be one, right? It could be 1 or 2 days, depending on the calendar year, as Dr. Fields mentioned before. But what will never change is they're not going to work less than 226. They will work, because it goes with the job, right? It goes with the job, and I don't think everybody's working it regardless. All we want to do is actually compensate them for the time. Should someone want to take days, you still have days that you receive through your local sick bank. You still have days that you receive through your state leave. So the days are still there. What we just want to do is bring everybody back up to the standard that we used to have before in the school district. And that standard was at 226.
Well, and be compensated for the days that you work. I know that we did speak with the principals about this, and after talking to them, I kind of did a survey of the room, and they all raised their hand. I know, and said that they would much rather be compensated for the days that they work than to receive non-work days. I believe Dr. Saunders actually did a survey of the 30 campus principals, and did how many of them?
I just pulled up Skyward right now and filtered it by non-working days, and 23 of the 30 campus principals left a minimum of 3 non-working days on the table, meaning they didn't even have an opportunity to use them.
And those just went away?
Yes.
Gone.
Gone.
Okay.
So, next slide.
Yes, sir.
Any more questions? Yes, ma'am.
Well, so it doesn't sound like we weren't compensating them. They were just not managing their vacation days essentially efficiently. You know, back to the military, you sit there all summer, and as a manager and leaders within an organization, you have to plan out your leave schedule. You have to know who's going to be gone when. Hey, are we all going to take a down week, or are we going to alternate weeks type thing? So it sounds like management and leadership was not doing a good job of making sure that people were using their days. And don't get me wrong, you get up to cabinet, you just work all the time. That's, that's management. But in terms of, there's 314 people on here. So there's a lot of other people in those pay series that probably should have been afforded. So, they were being paid for 220, but if they had actually used their vacation days, they were only expected to be here 218 or 219. If I'm doing the math of these ones right. So they were getting paid for an extra day
2
or
were
two.
paid vacation days. So 2 were days that were holidays that everybody's off. So
Okay.
it would be for those 9 that they were out.
Non-days,
But
so.
but I guess we're not explaining, and I'm going to let Dr. Gosh in because she did a lot of work on this as well. But I want to be clear on how we explain it. They worked 229 days to make up, because we're on a 220-day pay schedule, we were given, let's just say 9
Yep.
days. You need to take these off.
Yep.
Because you're working the days, you need to take them off. As a campus principal, oftentimes if you get sick, they just put in a sick day. They're not looking for the vacation day. They're just looking for, I'm sick, put in a sick day. If they have to go on a vacation, they put in a vacation day, and oftentimes they should have been putting in the non-work day. But I can tell you this, the ability to take 9 days off during the instructional year while the kids are in school, it can't happen. Not unless they get sick, and they're going to be out.
Why are
So-
they not using these days during the summer? I mean, we're off school. We know, I mean, people go on summer vacation.
I'm going to, first I'm going to let Dr. Gosh go, then I'm going to let Dr. Taganon go, and then Dr. Toppin. But I can tell you they work harder in the summer oftentimes than they do throughout the instructional year. So Dr. Gosh.
So I will speak to, the first thing I wanted to address is you said they may only actually be working 218 instead of the 220. So to kind of explain the way the calendar, so we are on a 12-month 220 calendar, and we're provided with the days that we are required to be here at work. When you add those up, it equals to 226. Okay, so say you have the 7 non-work days. Because our salaries are annualized, if I work all 226 days at the end of the year, and I don't take any of those vacation days, my salary is still annualized to 220. If I use all but 3 of those, it's still annualized at 220. If I'm an hourly employee and I show up and I work 226 days and I don't use my last 3 days, I do get paid back for those 3 days because I didn't use those non-duty days, but I'm still annualized at 220. So never at any point is anyone, unless they are docked pay because they don't have leave, are they working less than the 220. We do have on our pay scale, we do actually have some 12-month employees who actually work on a 220. So to give you an example, if we were to actually work on the 220, and as you stated, to potentially close down for the summer, and why aren't we taking them during the summer, the way that would be handled would be the way we handle all of our other, our teachers go home after the last day and they show up back at the beginning of the year. The way that would look is we would actually shut down the district today on June the 20th, and we would all return to work July the 10th. Because we do require everyone to take the week of 4th of July, and that 4th of July week is not included in these calculations. So that's, when you look at the days, so if you're wondering, where are these days coming from? Because everybody's working year-round, and we hear this, and we know that you're here, and we know you're working, but that's where those days kind of fall in.
So, Dr.
Oh, and one other
Okay,
thing.
Doctor.
I
Okay,
can
go
say
ahead.
from my side on the technology, because you asked about why don't we take it during the summer? Our busiest time in the department is when teachers are not here. And then when students are in class, there's a lot of things we can't do. We can't take the network down. And so we end up doing that over Christmas break. We end up doing that over spring break. And during the summer is really almost impossible for our folks to take off. I can tell you November last year was a ghost town of people in my building. We might have had 4 people in the technology building because they were just trying to burn up their days. So
And I can tag on to that, as a former principal, the busiest time of the year for
Is her
me
mic on?
was from June. As a former principal, the busiest time for me was from June to October, because I am hiring, I am setting the plan for the entire year.
Master
I could not take off time during the summer. I moved up here thinking I was going to get some time off. I gave back 6 days last year, because my busiest time up here is from January through September because of summer school, because of New Teacher Academy, because of August professional development. We help out with job fairs. We help out wherever we can, and all of that time is taken up during those months in the summertime. So I tell my family every year, we're going to have to figure some time in October for us to take a vacation together if we're going to take one, because the busiest time in the school year ever is between these months right now.
Any other questions on this?
Ms. Steffer?
First, I just have to say, this is the strangest experience I've ever had in my life, where I'm in a room discussing people's salary that are sitting around me and in front of me. So I just want to acknowledge that. That's an interesting position to be in. So I respect what y'all are trying to communicate to us, and thank you. I do want to ask how it compares to other districts. What are their numbers like? Are they all at 220? Have you compared to other districts?
I would ask, I know that Ms. Davis looked into it. The two that I looked into, I think it was Hayes County and, well, Hayes was 230. That's when we came up with the two, and so is San Antonio and NISD, in Northeast or North Side.
So
In who? In Pflugerville. Right. So they're all at 230. So,
And
around Region
SAISD as well, so some of our neighboring districts are at 230, and some of our neighboring districts are at 226. Again, that's because central office, that is standard for the days actually worked. Whether they, are able to take the days or not, that's a different story. And even if they do take the day, speaking from experience and in talking with our central office employees and our principals and assistant principals, oftentimes they'll put the day, but they're still working from home. They're not going to turn off their phones because of the level of responsibility that they feel. If they receive a call, they'll take the call. If there's an emergency, they'll answer it. Again, it's part of the job responsibility. And so what we're just trying to do and what we're proposing for your consideration is that we bring up the number of days from 220 up to 226, which is what we used to be up until 2 years ago.
And I just want to make one other comment, and that is, one of my main concerns is teacher retention and attracting more teachers to our district as well as keeping the ones we have. And they also work more than their days. They work evenings, they work weekends. I don't know if they get much time off in reality either. So I just want to acknowledge that too. And my concern that we give them all we can in
Absolutely.
salary. And we're not able to acknowledge the time they work more days.
I would say this, we do in some aspects, and I can let Ms. Davis speak to this or Dr. Tagano. But for a teacher who, let's say that they're a coach and they work more, they receive a stipend for that. And oftentimes for extra duties, extra clubs that they're involved in, they receive stipends for those as well. Even for teachers who choose to come back and provide tutoring, we do
and
supplemental pay
So
for them.
any tutoring or any extra duties, because they are teachers, they have the ability to receive supplemental pay. For a central office employee and for a principal, that's really not an option. And so that is the difference there.
Ms. Canoyer?
Thank you. I think it's fair to pay people when they work.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't think it's fair to not pay people when we expect them to work.
Yes, ma'am.
Central office staff has a difficult job. When I was in central office, I was a 216 employee, and so I had 3 weeks off in the summer. And I worked a lot of it at home because I knew coming back I was going to be gearing up for a new teacher, for returning teachers. I had PD to put on, I had data to analyze, I had all kinds of reports and things to prepare. So, when you reach this level of responsibility, as you said, it requires more time. I don't think it's fair to be shorting people that have taken on this amount of responsibility. So I approve this. I'm for it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And I'll close it, I'll wrap it around. And then, of course, we can move on. So my thought on all of this, too, would be that we still look at the quality of life. I honestly think we overwork you guys. I know you guys are exempt, but we do overwork. But I agree with everyone's point. Get paid for the days you work. But I will also acknowledge the fact that, the only way that we can compensate teachers is by increasing their salary. And we know that they take work home with them. We know they're, so the $586,000 is far more than which was initially proposed. I mean, it's $500,000 that we're proposing to now equalize. One thing to note, when we did the raises initially, we encountered some bumps in the road because we were talking about pay equity. And we realized that there were some areas that we needed to adjust, and we made those adjustments accordingly. But it's a slippery slope, because how do you recognize one group and forget others? And so that's problematic. And my only concern in this is that we're going to increase days, which will obviously give employees with those increased days more money for those days, especially since they weren't using non-duty days. They were always working it. We're paying them. And I would like to evaluate potentially giving a small increase to teachers under that pay grade only. But it's just because I'm looking at equity. If we're going to raise one area, I still see it as a raise, we need to be equitable in that, to acknowledge our teachers' hard work. Because if I had $586,000 and I had a choice between administration and teachers, my goal would to support teachers in the classroom. Not again that I have no disrespect for all the hard work you guys are doing, but just that the teachers need more love and support. There's more of them. But we can create a winning scenario for everyone, I think. But that's just my thought, and that's why I wanted to share, because I want additional input on that, because it's an important thought, and we need input on that from the board. Ms. Eaton?
First, I just want to say thank you all for all the work y'all do, because anytime any of the board members ask for something or show concern about something, you always come back and bring us the information, and I appreciate that. The whole purpose of the study that we're going to do on salaries is we agreed that we're getting the study done so that we can adjust those pay. Not at this time, but once we get the study so that everybody will get the money that they deserve. So I don't understand why we're trying to change it now. And then, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, when those days were taken away from you all, you weren't even informed,
That is correct.
right?
Correct.
That is correct.
So I'm mystified by that. So don't understand it, but I do understand that all you're asking for is what you deserve because you're here, you're doing the work.
And that's-
I did call around.
That's
I
what
talked to some friends about this.
Yes,
and,
ma'am.
You know, they were shocked that you're only at 226. So
I just wanted to say, in terms of your statement, Mr. Macias, I think it's kind of a false analogy to compare the need for an increase in pay with us trying to compensate people for the days that they're working. It's not a correct analogy to say that if we're giving them an increase in salary. All we're saying is we surveyed the staff, and they want to be compensated for the days that they work. Oftentimes when they get these days and they're rushed, or the analogy that Dr. Goss used was in November, it's a ghost town. When you're taking all these days at the end of the month, that's no way to take your days off. That's just you going home watching Judge Judy. And what we're saying is that people are actually working the days, they just want to be compensated for those days. This is not whether we should be giving an increase to someone. We're talking about whether we should be compensating them for the days that they're actually working. Yes.
That's correct.
And Ms. Eden did bring a fine point up about, and she asked the question, why are we doing this now if we've not had the TASB study? So it goes both ways, right? That's a sword that cuts both ways. So essentially why we're making this big adjustment if we haven't had the TASB study to begin with. Your recommendation, I think, has weight, so don't get me wrong. I believe there is weight there. But the question still is, we still need a compensation study. This may be reversed next year. I'm okay with the investment, with us doing the analysis on what needs to be done. But that is another question. We haven't had that study, but yet you're recommending this.
But
It's
the
because it
difference
aligns
is,
just.
Mr. Macias, it's not, we're talking the number of days, they're physically doing the work. With the study is because of all
Market value.
the in-between. Like she just said, she got new people coming in making just about as much money as she's making, and she's a supervisor, she's training them. That is what the compensation study is about, is to get us straight on that level. It's not about the number of days that they're working. They're not asking to work more days. They're really just asking to have their salaries put back where they were, and it was taken away from them without even giving a notice.
So everything that we're sharing with you today is in response to some of the questions that we've received as we've gone through this budget workshop. All I heard is there was a question as to why 230 days for cabinet, and what about other people, who else falls into that category, how many days are they working? So what we did is we tried our best to just put together for you what it is that people are working. It is not asking for a comparison to market value, because we're not even there. It is also not asking for a % increase in anybody's salary. It's truly just asking, this is how many days people are working. 2 years ago, that's what we used to be at. We used to be at 226, and prior to that, 2 years ago, it was changed unbeknownst to us, to anybody affected by that. And so the reason it's here, it's because it's a response to a question that was asked.
And I was going to amend the compensation plan to decrease the days to 226 for cabinet and add principals. That would have been my motion. But you guys, you did everything. So, I mean, it's almost like, well, okay. But I'll defer. Are there any other comments on this before we move on? Ms. Canoy?
So I remember 2 years ago, there was a big kerfuffle about making everybody take vacation all at the same time, and this whole thing
4th of
was a
July.
part of all that.
It was 4th of
And it was
July.
4th of July and the next week, and everybody was going to have to take vacation.
Yes, ma'am.
And we pulled back off of that because there was a big outcry about it. But some of the other parts of it snuck in anyway. And I think this is one of those. I don't know any districts where central office people are working, 220 days. I just don't. So this is what it should be.
All right. So next, we would like to go through some of the other amendments that we have in here and questions that came up.
So I am, again, going to just go through, and I believe everybody has a copy of the compensation plan that's red line, blue lined. And that just shows what we currently have, what's published and posted and was adopted in May's board meeting. And then we're going through some of the questions that were posed, so we're going to try our best to answer those for you at any time. If you have any questions, please go ahead and stop us, and we'll do our best to respond. So I'm going to start with the teacher pay scale. I'll start out by saying that the compensation plan is not a spit out of the Skyward program. So positions and allocations that we have in our program, in our management system, are there, and so then we have to write them out in the compensation plan, which is written as a separate document. And sometimes there's going to be typos, and that's what you'll see in some of these cases. And I'll start with the very, very first one, academic trainers. Academic trainers, it's the very first on the right-hand side of the teacher pay scale. It was published as 187. I can tell you when academic trainers, when they've always been on 197, that was a straight-up typo. It's already budgeted as 197. We have the people there working in the position as 197. That position came about as a result when we restructured our TI program many years ago, and those people concentrate on providing teachers the support through coaching. Academic trainers do not have to have, it's not a requirement of the job to have an administrator certificate. Academic coaches are required to have a principal certificate. And so that's why an academic trainer is found on the teacher pay scale. It's teacher contract plus 10 additional days. And that was truly a typo on my part. We're fixing that to 197, what they currently work, what they have always worked since the inception of this position about 3 or 4 years ago. So then, the next one's LOTC teacher. If you all recall, when we launched the Office of Innovation, one of the programs that was launched at the middle school was the Leadership Officer Training Corps at 197. That was, this last year was our first year, and those teachers are 197. They're 187 plus 10 days. And so that's already an approved budget position. We're simply adding it because it was left out of the compensation plan, but we have the 5 LOTC instructors sitting at the campuses right now. Then we have a central office counselor under the teacher pay scale. We added that. They are in there with where you have the counselor lead high school for 220. We've had a district office counselor working 220 days, and so we're adding that position in there. It's now reflected in the comp plan as well. So those 3 positions that I just mentioned were currently allocated, they're currently filled. We just needed to make sure it was reflected in the comp plan. And so you see that in your comp plan.
And that wasn't a new position, right?
No, ma'am, that's not new. We've had that person there for the last couple of years.
Okay.
We just went ahead and we annotated Counselor Elite High School together with the district office
Okay.
in there. And so anything I'm adding in, you'll see it in blue line in your sample comp plan. And then we also are proposing to add a JECA counselor.
I can speak to that if you want.
Please do.
In the last graduation, if you've noticed, when we went to the graduations, you had graduation classes of 400, 500, 600. And then we had one graduation class of 93 that had a cumulative total of scholarships in what they had earned of $30 million. At all of the comprehensive high schools, they have a college and career counselor that helps them put in those applications to receive scholarship funds. At JECA, they do not. In addition, when you speak to the social emotional aspect, we know that at JECA we had a tragedy in terms of the ability for the counselor to connect with the students over there and be an advocate for a cry out. I can tell you that it was talked about that there were almost 20,000 applications that were put in that came out of JECA. In comparison to ones with bigger classes and more students, but less earnings in terms of scholarship funds and applications submitted. But they have a person specifically for that. At JECA, they have one counselor who does both, the SEL portion and puts in all the applications. So if ever there was a need for another counselor to be there because you have a person putting in more scholarship applications and the need for someone for those students who are under the mass pressure of academic performance, like they have a cry-out person that they can speak to. So this was our amendment to that. And I can tell you, at the end of the year, one of the things that I like to do is go to all of the graduation practices and talk to the seniors. And one of the questions I ask is, hey, if you had an idea or if you could do something, what would be the one thing that you would do to improve JECA? And collectively, they all raised their hand and said, there needs to be another counselor over here. This is unfair. We're over here getting the work done. We're putting in our applications, and people need someone that they can talk to who's not focused on getting scholarships up as well. So that's our reason for recommending the college counselor at JECA. Yes, ma'am.
I guess I'm concerned that, I'm looking at the board goals and constraints and, making sure we apply money toward those goals. And I look at the ratios at the other high schools, and then I look at their CCMR numbers, because I'm not judged on dollars of scholarships gotten. We are judged on CCMR readiness and numbers. So we have 3 high schools who are extraordinarily low on their CCMR numbers. I know Dr. Toppin's working on it, but we're going to put another counselor at the high school that's already 100% CCMR. They're our top leading school there. It just doesn't feel like the correct application of resources to meet our board goals. If we have an extra counselor at play and want to put an extra $100,000 on the table, it seems like that person would be much better used at whichever high school has our lowest CCMR, where we have kids not getting they're not on any college, career, or military track. I mean, that's 33% of our graduates are not on any track, and 100% of the JECA ones are.
I'm gonna take Mr. Macia's point of view on this. To look at the counseling position as CCMR, in my opinion, again, another false analogy. They're there for social emotional support, and we've already shown at that campus where there's more social and emotional pressure. And we've had an incident with a student who was unsuccessful in managing that pressure just this year, too. And that's the pressure coming from that campus, but the person who's over there is focused on CCMR. We can see that from $30 million in scholarships. But what we can also see is the need for someone for them to be able to talk to and communicate with. And I'm getting this feedback from the people who are on their way out after being there for 4 years. So it can't just be about CCMR. The reason for the counselors to be there is for social emotional support. And if you ask a counselor, they'll tell you that's their focus. They won't even speak to the CCMR aspect. But that's the focus of the counselors for being there, and we know that there's a major need for those students there, and we just wanted to put this in here because we wanted to advocate for them.
And I thank you
Christine?
so much for, explaining that as to why.
She's the counselor, I apologize, I forgot. Yes.
As to why, and, extra counselor was added. That one counselor was doing everything. And there's no way that you can do all the data and also actually counsel anyone. That's an overload right there. And so I'm happy to see this. I know that there can always be extra added to other campuses if need be, and if the funds and everything is there. It would be great to have extra help, but at this current time, I do understand why you guys are adding that extra counselor there for that extra support. And so I'm happy to see that.
Yes, ma'am.
Did I see one more thing? Taking out hers. Well, then I guess if we're going to go to a 1 to 200 counselor to student ratio at one high school, in the essence of equity, then I would want to see that across all of our high schools, because the students at Wagner have just as many challenges socially and emotionally as JECA students. And life is challenging everywhere. And I know at my own kids' high school, I know those counselors are so busy doing schedules and college stuff that there isn't a lot of time for them even to do any of the actual counseling and sitting down and talking to kids. So to cut one school in half on their ratios while the other schools remain doubled, and even look at some of our elementaries. We're at 1 to 600, 1 to 700 ratio on counselors in some of our elementary schools. So if we need a counseling program relook to, and I know there's a shortage of counselors all over the state, so that doesn't help the situation either. But I feel like this would Band-Aid one school and then create some inequities across some of our other schools if we don't go fix them also.
I would say that the responsibilities at the elementary level in terms for counselors is different from what it is at the secondary, especially at the high school level. I would also say that the ratio, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Saunders or Dr. Toppin, I think it's about 350 to 1 for counselors at the high school level. And that campus has over 400 students. So it's not 200 to 1. It would be, currently they're at 400 to 1.
Oh, right now, but this would make them 200 to 1.
It would make them 200 to 1. But the other campuses are at 350 to 1. And they also have a college and career counselor that's not counted in that mix. I believe they have a lead counselor. Is the lead counselor counted in that?
It has a smaller caseload, but the lead counselor is there as well. JECA doesn't have that.
Gotcha.
And if you want to make the point about elementary, elementary has a master schedule built so that the counselor sees every single kid on that campus. So there's that opportunity for the counselor to impact kids at the elementary level, even though they might be 700 to 1.
What I would also agree is that social emotional support is, and I've been here long enough since the first graduating class of JECA. I know the stress level is extremely high there, and there is a need. So every dollar that we can expend to help students that are going through that level of pressure is important. My only question would be that we've talked about in the past where we're paying based on enrollment. So in terms of the counseling services there's opportunity to pay based on enrollment, and if that's been considered in this new position, because they're not going to have the same level of students that they're engaged with as a traditional high school would. So we've had this problem with JECA where we're paying the same as if it was a traditional in some capacities. So have we talked about that, or have you considered that?
No, sir, we have not. Like with the teachers.
With counseling in this new position? I mean,
But what I'm saying is even with teachers, we don't necessarily look at we just look at not how many students they have in their class, what the capacity is that we hired them for to perform that task. And we were just saying here that we see a need for a counselor because of the social and emotional experiences that we've seen there, as well as for what we see that they're producing in terms of performance. If
Sure.
we feel that what we're seeing doesn't adequately show a need, once again, I advocate against that. I think we've seen that this year with the students and their issues this year, too. And then also in terms of the performance, so we can see that there's a need. If the board feels like we can't truly justify it at this point, we're willing not to put it there.
No, I think we're good. I guess my whole point in all of this, and again, just as we continue, we'll have a more robust conversation throughout the year as we do our budget analysis. But with 90% of our funds tied up in personnel, roughly 85, 90%.
Yes, sir.
The opportunity to be efficient there is open. And so we have a pay scale for principals based on size and enrollment, which it wouldn't be a stretch to say counselors would fall under that same idea so that we're being efficient with our expenditures in terms of personnel.
Understood. We can
So,
look at that.
We'll cross that bridge again, but just wanted to ask the question.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions in relation to this? You can continue.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to move to the CIS scale on,
Did we speak about removing teacher master stipend?
oh, thank you. So this is a proposal that we are wanting to discuss now, but we wouldn't necessarily be doing that now, simply because we've already adopted that into the comp plan and we don't want to remove, but it is something that we want to bring to the table. Is currently on the comp plan, we have a master's degree stipend for $1,500, a teacher doctoral degree stipend for $500, and then a master's degree in the teaching field stipend for $1,500. And so what we're proposing, not for this year, but to start having those conversations for 24-25 school year, would be to remove the teacher's master degree stipend of $1,500 and leave only the master's degree in the teacher field stipend for $1,500. So in other words, if I am a math teacher and I have a master's in math, then I would be eligible to receive the $1,500 stipend. But if I am a math teacher and I have a master's degree in human resources, then that is not a master's degree that would help you teach in the field that you are currently placed at. Now, that being said, that ties into another proposal we would like for you to consider. And it's not written in, but it's one that we're going to share with you right now, and that has to do with the librarians. We have in our compensation plan a stipend for counselors. It's currently lead counselors at $3,500, high school counselors at $2,500, and elementary counselors at $1,500. So in order to be a counselor, you do need that master's, right? So they are on a teacher scale, and they have additional days, and then they have the stipend because of their duty. We don't have that stipend for librarians. And similarly, they require a master's degree in order to hold that position. And so we are not paying out that stipend for librarians. If you look at that comp plan, it's not anywhere there. Under several years ago, there were some stipends that were being paid out to some librarians and some not. And if you were to ask me to explain the why and what of how things happened in the past, I wouldn't be able to explain that to you. But what I can tell you is we would like to be able to say, similarly to how counselors need to have a master's to be able to do their job, and we're paying out a stipend for it, we would like to offer the same to the librarians in the exact same manner that we have here. That proposal would cost $48,500 for all of our 25 elementary school and middle school librarians, for our high school librarians at a $2,500 stipend. And we currently have already one lead librarian, and so we just would like to match that stipend to the lead counselor librarian. So that is something that we're bringing to you for your consideration, to ensure that everybody is paid equitably. There are some grandfathers and, I say grandfathers and grandmothers, I don't know the reasoning behind that, but what I do know is that we currently don't have a stipend similar to that, and we are proposing to include that today. The removing the teacher's master stipend at $1,500 is something that I believe our folks are already counting on, so we're not proposing that that be removed today, but we would like for you to consider in the future, just to ensure that all of the stipends are a bit more equitable. I can keep going, I'm just pausing for any questions.
These are big changes, so I just want to make sure. Ms. Canoyer?
So when I look at the master's degree in teaching field stipend, is that not something that our librarians are getting?
So a couple of years ago, that was removed, but it
From
stayed,
librarians?
yes. But
But
it
they're
stayed
paid on
in.
the same scale, so that doesn't make sense to me. Okay.
Yes.
Yes,
So,
okay, I got it. I was going to say, so they get that 1,500 and another 1,500, but they're not getting the 1,500 period, which is
Some are
strange.
not. So,
Okay.
and some are not, and some are.
Okay,
And about, I think it was 2 years ago, where there was communication sent out that said they're no longer going to be getting it, so that's how the practice has been operating. And so what we're saying is, I don't understand the reason for why some and
if
why
we give it to a
not.
teacher, why not a librarian? That makes no sense to me at all. So,
Well,
you know,
and therefore, that's why
Okay,
we're bringing that. I mean, we're just taking one step at a time.
Put back something that was taken away.
So are you saying that there are some librarians now that are getting just willy-nilly, they're getting?
I don't think it's willy-nilly. There was
Well, I
some
mean, you don't know
thought
why.
and process.
You don't know why?
We don't know why.
Dr. Taganon, do you have a little more background on that?
Just a little bit more, not much. I can say that it's not willy-nilly, I don't believe. I'm making an assumption because if you look at prior compensation plans, it was in place for librarians, well, anyone with a master's in 2019, 2020. Then in 2020, 2021, there is a stipulation that says hires from that year moving forward would only be eligible for the master's degree stipend for degrees in the area that they teach. So it was that year that it changed. So the assumption is those librarians who were hired prior to that have been grandfathered in to receive that master's degree stipend.
Okay, so you still have some that qualify under the previous plan
That
are
is the
continuing to
assumption,
get it,
yes.
and then the others were stopped.
Yes, but then in last year's plan, it came back in. And so I don't know why.
Correct.
And so
let's make it equitable.
Yes.
we're trying
So
to,
they're all getting it or not? No?
some are and some are not.
Still?
So for 1 year, I guess that was paused because that's how it was written in the comp plan. So those hires for that year did not receive it. But then last year, I wouldn't be able to tell you with certainty, because last year then it was added back into the comp plan. So all that to say, there was a little back and forth in the different compensation plans. I'm trying to just,
Was it
You're
part,
trying to be nice, huh?
It was added back in, but not for everybody. We're still missing some people that
yes,
should be
there
getting.
are currently some librarians that when we ran that stipend report, there are currently some librarians not receiving the stipend. What we would like to do is, we want to just make it equitable, but we want to bring it to you first and say that would cost $48,500.
Does that make us liable for some kind of suit of unfairness or?
So anytime that there is a change, it is written in the compensation plan. We can't go back and correct what had occurred years past. Otherwise, we would probably be correcting everybody's salary. But
I think some of this may have happened when for elementary teachers, when they had they put the gifted and talented and librarian, or the academic enrichment or whatever, and they combined that. And so some of those people didn't have librarian certification, and they were doing both. And so that may be why they may not have had that master's in library, and so that may have goobered everything up.
It may have, but I do know that when we moved to DOI, that also caused a problem, because under DOI, they do not need to have a master's. But when they do, right now, the practice is you don't get it. And so we want to make sure that they are eligible for that stipend, and we just wanted to be fully transparent in sharing that with you. And that's a proposal we're making.
I was just going to say to Ms. Canoyer's point, there was a point in time also where elementary campuses were splitting librarians.
Yes.
And so there was a stipend attached to some of the librarians that were split between two campuses.
And the-
Ms. Ryan?
Yeah, I'm going to say I do not agree with the removing of the teacher master's degree, the general stipend. Looking at, because remember, he sent us, we do have a 16-month-old TASB survey. We just did it last February. Everybody's got it. It was sent out to the board. Of the 14 school districts they compared us to, all 14 of them have a general, doesn't have to be in your teaching field, master's degree general stipend. The average for those was $1,500. There are 3 districts that up that if it is in your, so instead of getting $1,500 and you're a math teacher with a math master's, you might get $2,000. But none of them have removed the master's teacher's degree. So based on the last TASB survey and what everyone was doing 15 months ago, I wouldn't agree with removing that, because that wouldn't be consistent with our area.
So that particular general master's degree stipend was removed in 2019. So that was not something that we did.
You're saying it wasn't on the 22, 23
So,
conversation?
go ahead.
It was removed in 2019, 2020. And then if you look at our other compensation plans, 2020, 2021, there's a stipulation that says hires from this year moving forward would only be paid for the master's stipend for their teaching degree field.
Because that's not what the approved 2022-23,
Yes.
which is our governing document, signed and approved by the board last year, says those people are entitled to that. So you're right. I hope we don't have issues where people are not getting paid and should be getting paid because we signed a document saying they should be getting it.
Well, obviously, Dr. Fields look into that possibility. My question is, I do believe in equity. I think that's important, that we're fair with our compensation. But I do have 2 other reminders. We also need to ensure we're utilizing our librarians for their intended purpose, and I'll be one of those candid board members. Technology, in my opinion, is not, no offense, Lacey, we need to get you other technology people, is not one of the things we should be utilizing skilled master's degree professionals who are certified. So utility is one, and second, the whole only reason we do this, or not only reason, but one of the reasons, is retention. So we do all of this, are we still retaining the talent in the district, and are we utilizing them correctly? And obviously, we'll defer to Dr. Fields and the team to make sure that that is actually being executed. We've done the equity part, it appears, but now I need to challenge you to ensure that we are utilizing them to the best of their abilities.
I would say that, yes, I believe that we can always streamline and get better at everything that we do. When you speak to technology, one of the things that came up today when we were having cabinet and speaking is that we get the sense that TEA is moving to more online resources and moving away from the old-fashioned textbook. And there's a lot of ways in terms of project, you guys help me out here, project-based learning, where it's a lot of it is online and technical and not necessarily the old go to the library, look for the book and check it out scenario. So there's a lot of our HQM stuff, high-quality instructional materials are available online as well. So technology is really taking a huge component of what they had to shift the old-fashioned responsibilities of the librarian is slowly shifting to something that's a little bit more contemporary that's needed. And students being able to come to the library, and it's no longer the place where you go, shh. It's the place where kids are sitting around collaborating, coming up with ideas and getting stuff done. Now, are we using them to the best of our ability? Like I said, we can always get better. We can always get better. And we're going to look at ways that we can get that done.
That's all I can ask
Yes,
at this
sir.
point. Are there any other questions in relation to this? All right, move forward.
Okay. And so now we're moving over to the CIS pay scale. And the reason that we're not recovering any other scale, we're not covering the police or auxiliaries, we're not proposing any amendments to that. So under clerical instructional support, we are removing the word secretary counselor at the middle school. That's because when you adopted this compensation plan in May, we had shifted that position from a 303 to a 305, and you can find that at the very last part of the 305 pay scale, the registrar counsel / counselor secretary. It's right there. So we just needed to remove it from the 303 because that position was shifted to 305. Then we have the 306 Secretary of Guidance and Counseling. It's now called the Secretary of Student and Family Support. It's just a title correction. That is it. Nothing else. The position was there and it's going to remain there. We're just calling it what it is.
Before you move on to the AP scale, can I mention something about the police officers? I know that you guys probably heard in HB3 where they're saying that there needs to be an armed person on every campus. We're not making a recommendation right now as to how we're going to get that done or how we propose to get it done going forward, but I do want to make it a point to let you know that we will be coming back to the board, probably saying, hey, this is how we want to get it done, or this is what we need. But we're not prepared to make a proposal at this point. But I didn't want to leave that on the table without some recognition that we may have to revisit that as a state mandate. Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Eden?
I have, 2 of my sessions I went to was strictly about that.
Oh, at SLI?
So I have those, the presentations.
Yes, ma'am.
There's a couple of them that I would like to share.
I'd
so
love
the
that.
Staff that weren't a part of it can see where it's headed.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, go ahead.
So basically for CIS scale and summary, no true additions. We're just fixing typos, changing names to reflect what they are actually called. Okay? And so then we move to the 501 pay scale, which is the administrative or professional AP scale. So in 501, and again, questions that have been brought up before, we're addressing through this. There is a coordinator for strength and conditioning. We're removing that. That is actually placed in the teacher pay scale as a strength and conditioning coach at 220 days. So that was a position that does not exist, so we are removing that from there and to reflect what we really do have, and that you can find on the teacher pay scale. Then you have in 501 also, we are removing the dropout recovery specialist because that's actually called truancy officers. That's simply a title change. We have the dropout recovery specialist and you have the truancy officer at the bottom. The name dropout recovery specialist is not used. And then in 501, we are adding an HR specialist. If you recall, board members, several months ago, you approved a downgrade from 504. This is already approved in the comp plan, so it's not costing any money. We just want to make sure that it is reflected there, and so you will see in your blue line, red line copy that we're adding the HR specialist. That's already a person already in that position. Then in 501, we have the truancy officer moving from 187 days to 197. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that what you're thinking?
Where
I
at?
don't think that we did that. We are paying our truancy officer supplemental pay to come and work over the summer. So that's actually we're actually paying our truancy officers to come in over the summer, to come and work and help find some of those students. But rather than moving to 187 to 197 days, we are paying them supplemental pay. That is my mistake.
Understood.
That is my mistake. So that is not a proposal. That is no change to that one. Correct. It will stay at 187. They are receiving additional compensation through supplemental pay. Then for 504, if you go down to 504, you have we're removing the special ed social worker. That position does not exist. It still stayed, it's an old remnant in the comp plan. We are removing it. Then if you stay at 504, we have social workers at risk. We are proposing to move the social workers from 202 to 216 days. And I think I have the cost in a future slide. And I don't have that copy. Do you have
I
an
wouldn't worry
updated
about the
copy?
cost. I'd probably
Yeah.
speak to the rationale.
Yes, and the reason for that is we have our special ed we have our social workers that work with our wraparound services. So even though our buildings are still in the making, we are already providing that service, and we provide it here actually at the ERC. And we have our social workers that make that connection when we receive gaggle alerts. And when we receive any kind of alerts, then our social workers make that connection with the parents, with the students, connect them to the services. And then after the services are completed, then there's also the follow-up. So our social workers do a lot of that work over the summer. And currently, they've been working. We know that things are different after COVID, and we know that there's just a different need. And so for that reason, we are making that proposal
Yes,
to
sir.
move them from 202 to 216.
Here you go.
I don't get that. For a cost of $16,000.
16,000?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
For the 504 social worker at risk, to move from 202 to 216 days. $16,000.
And in regards to social workers, is there a social worker on every campus or? by
We're
feeder?
talking about these people, we're talking about the 3 social workers here at Central
Central
Office.
office.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. So we are also under 504, removing the specialist for curriculum instruction and CNI data. That position no longer exists. We are also under 505, removing the coordinator for human resources. That was the one I mentioned to you earlier. It was also downgraded to a CIS 307 HR position control specialist that we've mentioned to you before. Very important to have as we're going through this budget process to be able to provide more accurate numbers. And then for 505 coordinator, we are adding the adult and community ed has been moved from a specialist at a 501 to a 505, and that is because part of their role is to develop and write curriculum for our after-school care. So it is part of the coordinators that focus on the development and implementation and training of curriculum. And then we have our 505 coordinator for guidance that currently exists.
Can you
at-
speak to the Adventure Club part about that too?
Yes. So for Adventure Club, several years ago, we made the shift to making sure that it's just not after-school care, but that it's meaningful for the students and that they use that time wisely, not only to help them with their homework, but also to help them actually take a learning experience from it. So several years ago, we started with a specific development of curriculum and the implementation of it. And so this person would work with the coordinators at the campus and after-school care to be able to train them on the curriculum that is written, to be able to implement it with our children and make sure that the after-school care is really an experience for them that is not just daycare, but that is actually enriching and helping them be successful in their academic journey for our little ones that are there.
Do we fall back and evaluate where the student's performance is? Because what I'd like to know is if we're going to be putting that sort of structure and investment strategically, what's the outcome? Is it working or does it sound good? So what's the accountability? Are we following through to see if they're performing better in the classroom?
We could definitely create a study on that just for the students who are enrolled.
Because my contention with after-school programming, and actually, we didn't tackle it this budget, but I plan to introduce stuff through the year that talks about support for middle school students that's focusing on their curriculum. And so we need to know that whatever we're investing resources in, that is yielding the type of expectation. And if we're not tracking it, then we don't know if it's doing what we want it to do. So it's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Next is.
And the last piece on this slide is a 505 coordinator for guidance and social emotional learning. We have that existing position. We want to reflect it in the comp plan, and we are moving it from 216 days to 220 days. And then on the next page, yes, ma'am.
One moment, Ms. Ryan?
Yes, I'm sorry, back up to the strength and conditioning coordinator, or coach, whichever name we're calling it. How many of those do we have? We have a male and a female at each high school campus? So 6?
I believe
many?
we have 3, and
3, one per
one at each campus.
Okay. What is the reason for that now bumping up anywhere between $12,000 to $20,000 more a year compared to where they were on 501? Putting them onto the teacher scale and them still getting the stipend, that's quite a pay increase.
So we didn't put them on that scale. I'm just reflecting a decision that was made by the previous administration. There is nobody in that pay scale. There is nobody in that allocation 501. In 501, those positions existed.
They're already being paid on the teacher pay scale?
Correct.
Yes, ma'am.
They were already there.
They were there.
We're just removing something that nobody's in anymore. They were moved to teacher pay scale.
That's not a recommendation we're bringing to you. We are simply reflecting what happened, and it wasn't.
It was just never put on this document that we signed that is the Bible of what everybody gets paid. It's not on there either. Okay.
I don't understand your statement.
So, I mean, this is the guiding document.
Yes,
the
ma'am.
board
You are
approved
absolutely
that
correct.
Everyone is supposed to get paid off of. So this is really scary that people are not getting paid what this document says. If it lists a stipend on here and you're not getting the stipend, or if you're listed, the strength and conditioning coach is not on this document from last year. What is the guiding document that tells us
Well,
what
that's not,
that
that's.
person gets paid?
I think right. I think you're misinterpreting. We're not saying that they're not getting paid. We're saying that before where they were a 501, and that was their position as strength and conditioning coordinator. Last year, they were moved to teacher pay scale, and now they're being paid at 220 days on the teacher pay scale.
Okay, I'm just saying.
So the reason why we're asking that the other one be removed is because they no longer function in that capacity. They're functioning in the teacher pay scale capacity.
I'm just
And
wondering
rather
if
than
that was never reflected in the approved compensation plan next year. That position
Yes,
on the
ma'am.
teacher
You
pay
can-
scale, strength and conditioning coach, does not exist in the 22-23 document. So that bothers me. So that means there was an entire board.
They were coordinator then. Now they're moving to.
I'm saying strength and conditioning was only on that document last year in one place, and it was 501. It was
Right.
never listed.
Correct.
Right, because we're moving to that now.
No, ma'am. Oh, well, to her
It
point.
happened
They've already
this
been being
school
paid that,
year,
even though
it
it's not on
happened
the
in
document.
22-23, at the beginning of the school year. That's when it happened. And so it wasn't written in here.
Yeah.
And so we are trying to show you.
We're trying to just
We're
make
trying
it
to show
accountable.
you what-
We're
yes.
just trying to correct.
Yeah.
Proceed. I'm sorry. Ms. Stanford, yes, go ahead.
Do you have a net effect from all of these removing, downgrading, moving to? the net effect to the budget, a plus or a minus from these?
So where there is an effect, I'm letting you know right then and there. So the only ones that have shown an effect thus
16,000.
far, the
It's just the
16,000
16?
from the social worker. Because what I'm sharing is that some of these changes already existed, such as the strength and conditioning coach. So they're already included in the budget that we're presenting you today. It's not something that we decided as an administration team to add or to make that change. That change happened, and to Ms. Ryan's point, wasn't shared with the board before. We're trying to share it with you now,
So
but
these
that's
are
an
just
allocation
notes,
that's already there.
basically. These are just notes saying we are correcting.
This is what we're doing, correct?
We're
Yes, ma'am.
correcting the budget to reflect something that's been happening that hasn't been
Not
documented properly.
correct. We're correcting it in the comp plan because in the budget, when we proposed it to you and we ran all of the reports, those
already in
line
there.
items and allocations were already there. So this comp plan is just a write-up to show people, hey, we have an allocation in Skyward that we're paying for under strength and conditioning coach that why or how, I don't know why, but they were moved from 501 to 220 at the beginning of last school year. And so that wasn't reflected here, so we're letting you know, hey, it's here, but it's part already of the budget that we proposed. It's part already of the general fund and where they're being paid of. So to your point, it is something that we're trying to show you, that we're trying to correct, but it's mostly just in writing for people to be aware of,
So
because
that
it's already.
therefore it will show up in our new budget where it wasn't showing up.
Let me help. Earlier we said that what we want to do is make some amendments to the compensation plan. The amendments that we're trying to make to the compensation plan now are simple ones that are being done, but as we went through and studied this, it wasn't, to Ms. Ryan's point, this is what people refer to. It needs to be as accurate as possible. So rather than us continue to see oversights, things that shouldn't be, we're going through saying, hey, we need to take this out. We need to put this in. We need to take this out. We need to put this in. Not for terms of changing the budget or increasing cost, just for making this more accurate.
Okay.
And that's where most of these changes are. So when you said, well, what's the net income associated? Right here, we move someone from 202 to 216 for about 16,000. The rest are simply, let's make adjustments and make sure that this reads the way it should. Make sense?
And we just think it's important to go line by line so that you can be aware, since we're getting the specific questions.
All right, next.
If you have a question, Ms. Ryan?
Oh, yeah, there's lots of questions.
All right.
You had questions.
Ms. Ryan?
I'm just wondering about the rest of the questions that the board had asked you guys about the rest of the 500 plan, 508, 510, and 511. Are we going to
Are you talking about the questions you sent yesterday?
No, these were sent last week.
Oh, okay. Well, we can go through those again if you'd like to. Would you like to go ahead and ask the ones you're concerned about?
Yes, so on 508, under the principals, sorry, I'm going back to the email I sent you. The big changes in the J-CARE and the JECA principals. One of them's $17,000 more and the other one's $9,000 more. Paying them both more, like $7,000 more than the Kitty Hawk Middle School principal makes. And getting close to, what a Judson High School type size high school makes. I don't see anything in the TASB pay survey that talked about recommendations of those not being within the correct position. So what led us to those two positions needing such significant pay increases for this year?
When we looked at these positions, what we found was that JECA and J-CARE. J-CARE is the alternative campus that handles the most difficult kids in the district. So at the secondary level. So when the comprehensive schools can't handle it, they do. It's a very stressful position in terms of the teachers and definitely for the principal. And we felt like having that person at the same level as and you're going to hear about, well, having that person at the same level of a middle school principal was not adequate for the level of work that was being provided. But we also knew that JECA, although a high school principal, was not a comprehensive high school principal, such as the bigger campuses that you'll see in 509. So what we did was create, and they do have a lot of work that goes on at JECA as well. So we created the position of 508A to compensate the J-CARE high school and middle school principal, as well as the JECA principal. And as a cabinet team, we felt like that was the best place for it, not on the same level as a middle school principal.
Do we have any data from other districts or TASB to back that up? Are the early college principals and their alternative school principals at Comal and Shirt Cibolo and other places, is that where they put them? Again, I'm worried about us Band-Aiding this compensation plan because everyone is wanting to wait for another TASB survey because we didn't really use the last one, I guess, to do anything. So we're going to do that over again. But yet we're Band-Aiding and moving things around now. And I don't want to give anything that then they're going to turn around and tell us to take away. I want to give pay and take it back. That's horrible.
And I get that. I do. I would tell you that with other early college, high school principals, I'll have to go back and check. I don't want to say something that I really can't support unless the cabinet is aware that they did some type of study for others, but I would rather go back and check that. I will say, though, that the things that we're talking about now were brought to the board prior to saying that we were going to do anything, and this was approved. So now what we're doing is I get it, you weren't here, but now what we're doing is going back and then we're going to re-look into it. So I have no problem going back. It was just, this was the recommendation of the cabinet at the time.
Okay. I just want to make sure changes we do are relevant to the market.
I would
in
say
terms of what
changes
other
we did
districts.
because we've already done a lot of these changes that you're bringing up. But go ahead, we're ready for the next one.
Go ahead.
Did you want to ask another one, Ms. Ryan?
Yeah, there's more in the 500 that I did have questions on.
No.
You can go ahead.
Well, let me just also stipulate, too, that we do realize this is an ongoing process, and I appreciate your attention to even catching things on the comp plan that were missed previous years.
Correct.
As we go through this. You know, Ms. Ryan had these questions, and I asked her if she could just share them in session with us on the board so that we can talk through them, because they're all important for all of us to hear. So I also just wanted to share, too, with Ms. Ryan and Ms. Stanford. I know you guys came in later in the process. We're going to continue to do this as we go through, and if we see any gross issues, we have the ability to do something about it. But more importantly, we're going to set the stage for next year when you guys are here for the full year as well. But there's no reason you can't ask the questions, and so we want to get some answers. But just be sensitive to the fact that some of this has already been reviewed, and I think you guys understand that. So, Ms. Ryan, if you have another question, go ahead.
I think the other big one I had, which is back to the awkwardness of they're sitting in the room, so let's talk about them, type thing. But the biggest thing I learned as an HR director was you have to take the faces out of compensation plans and position descriptions. You can't adjust things based on how hard people work. It has to be, what the position dictates type thing. And so I went back and watched the April meeting talking about the 511 position and the addition of it, and I saw a mention of it, no questions asked, and moved on. I'm wondering what the backup for that is, because I did go look at surrounding districts, and I did go find people at SLI. And their TASB pay survey didn't recommend switching to a 511. The salary they recommended a year ago for a deputy superintendent is not what is on here now. Our surrounding districts like Comal and Shirt Cibolo do not have 2 deputies, and the pay for those positions is nowhere near where they are, far below, by like $15,000 below, compared to what we're now, or I guess we did approve in the 511 newly created position. So I am seeing lots of things that tell me that that is not market appropriate. So I'm wondering what we have that does show that is market appropriate to have two and at that pay scale.
Yes, ma'am. I would first say that it's been a history of Judson to have two deputies. I remember that I was a deputy, I think Ms. Barra was. I believe that Dr. Nelson was and Louis Rodriguez was, if you wanted to go all the way back to the 90s. I believe that I was a deputy and Miss Robinson was a deputy as well. So this is not the inception of two deputies. I also remember coming to the board at the time saying, hey, my proposal is going to be a structure of two deputies. And I didn't get any feedback that that was a way that it wouldn't be entertained by the board. Now, what I have seen is that in all districts that I know of, and I did have someone go through, in ISD, they have 3 deputies. In San Antonio, they have 2 deputies. In Judson, 2. Comal, 1. Southwest, 1. Southside, 1. Seguin, 1. And SEUC ISD has 1. But they 2 deputies is not foreign, especially to Judson ISD. Now, I can tell you that the deputies are in a different pay grade from the assistant superintendents in almost all those other districts that I named. They're not paid the same as assistant superintendents. Judson was the only one that paid them in the same pay grade as an assistant superintendent. So I felt the need to elevate that position to a higher position than in the same pay grade as an assistant superintendent. Made that recommendation to the board, and I really didn't get any feedback that that wasn't something that they were willing to consider. So we moved ahead with it, and it passed without any discussion. So that's how we got to where we are right now.
Well, I would just say in all fairness, we didn't see that final compensation plan the day we passed it. So I was unaware of the additional pay grade. I do believe in the principle of 2 deputies. We have historically had that. You're correct. Even Nancy Robinson and Aleda Barra were when I arrived here in 2010. But we've just never had the distinction of a different pay grade, which again, different midpoints, there's more added to that. So the 2, when I heard this in April 18th, I didn't think it was going to be a pay grade increase. Mind you, so much has happened since April 18th, so please forgive me, too, for not remembering that exactly. But we just need to evaluate, again, back to the cardinal rule. We make this investment, what is that doing to the bottom line? What does that do for student impact? What does it do for retention? I mean, is Ms. Davis and Dr. Duartama going to leave because they're not at 511 pay grade? I don't think they will. I think they're committed to us. But that's the question, right? Because we can keep adding money to all these positions, but the goal is to make sure they can stay and it's a fair wage. And so
I really felt like the level of, and this is what I brought to the board.
Sure.
Before making the recommendation, was that we were going to create 2 deputy positions and then have all of the activities funnel through those 2 deputy positions. And I think that we've done that. And that's the way it's been. And I think that if you were to go back when it was Ms. Robinson and Ms. Barra, you'd find that they were in a different pay grade than the other executive directors or assistant superintendents at the time. They were not paid the same thing. And I don't think that that's overcompensation to have people who have a higher level of responsibility be compensated at a different level. And I kind of made the recommendation and asked about this before we made the change.
Well, and I want to be very clear. You and I have had our conversations.
Yes, sir.
I want you to make recommendations. They may not concur with what the board's wishes are, but your job is to bring those recommendations to us. I also shared with Ms. Ryan, if she believes that, this is something that we shouldn't have in the comp plan, she has the ability to make an amendment to the motion to downgrade those positions.
Understood.
And it's the will of the board to weigh in all those factors. This is really good discussion, and it's not meant to be personal on any level, but really just to evaluate how we want to move forward. If you have found evidence that there are other districts that have pay grade levels for deputy soups,
They do.
then I'm a bit more comfortable with that.
Yes, sir.
But that's another reason why the rationale exists. Not that you just created it arbitrarily, which I think Ms. Ryan was stipulating. How did this rationale come? So we'll take a look at that, and I'll yield. Are there any other comments or questions? Anyone else before I give it back to Ms. Ryan?
I just want to say, I'm not interested in telling you how to run your cabinet at all. And since I've been on the board, they've always had 2 deputy suits. Now, how it came about, I don't know. I know that they have adequate work, more than adequate work.
Yes, ma'am.
So I would hate to dump all that on one person.
Yes, ma'am. And to your point, I mean, Ms. Ryan made a comment. She said they're at the table. I'd ask Dr. Toppin and Ms. Davis, how do you feel about that? You need to turn your mic on.
Sorry. I definitely feel that I worked under the deputies when I was here at district office and did a lot of the work to support the work that they did. In addition to that, since I've been here at the district office, my job title has changed 3 times, which is because of the nature of the work. And so I've always served at the pleasure of the superintendent. And so when I think about the scope of the work that I'm doing right now, I will tell you that if you look around at other districts that are around us, in the role that I had before this particular position came up, I was serving as the Assistant Superintendent of Special Ed and CNI. That is unheard of in any other district, but that's what I needed to do to support the work of the superintendent at the time. I continue to serve in that role because I feel very strongly about special ed, and it's one of the areas I don't mind serving in. However, when you look at the scope of the work with how we had to, under Dr. Fields, how we had to split the management of the district. CNI is in a beast by itself, but then when you add in all the special programs, you add in all of the supports that we have for various different departments in the district. There is, and the fact we only have 1 assistant superintendent under me right now and a chief. When you add all that stuff together, it does begs that you need to match the work with the salary of the work. I have stayed with Judson ISD. I've had plenty of opportunities to leave this district, but this district is in my blood. I've been here for 22 years. I have worked my way up from a classroom teacher all the way to where I am right now in this district. I feel very strongly about Judson. I stay because I believe in Judson ISD. My students, my own children were students and graduated from Judson ISD. I don't ever intend to leave because I feel that strongly about it. My husband asks me all the time, why do you stay? When I have been given opportunities in other districts to leave. And I get opportunities every summer. I get calls, I get emails, I get all kinds of offers just through word of mouth. But I have been in this district. I believe in the work that we do. I know the people in this district. I don't intend to leave. However, I have a kid in college now. And when I'm looking at my finances, when I'm looking at everything that we're doing, when I have to stand back and consider the fact that how much I'm paying in tuition, how much I'm paying in room and board, how much I'm paying on her new car she just got, all of those things have to factor into that. And so I guess to end it all today, I stay because I believe in what we do. I believe in what we do. However, I also believe in paying people for what they do.
I would also ask Ms. Davis to say a few words, but as you know, we took her from the innovation chief and put her in the Herculean task of being in charge of the budget. And now she has several, you can speak for.
I started in Judson over 6 years ago. I came here and I served under CNI. And in that time, there was a great increase. We went up 11 points in the last accountability piece, and we went from a C to a B. And at that time, I was looking for ways to bring more money to the district and be able to impact schools that I grew up in that were historically underperforming and that just needed a different thought. And I strongly believe in the work that I do in innovation because it impacted me. Education just didn't change my life. It impacts an entire family and it impacts entire communities. I strongly believed in that work, and I was doing the work in innovation for a year at the same time that I was also doing curriculum instruction. So taking on additional tasks is not the first time that I've been asked to do that. And I do it wholeheartedly because I believe in what education can do for a family. That being said, when we conducted the TASB market pay scale, I was 81% market value. And I was doing 2 jobs at that time, in innovation and curriculum instruction. I chose to move over to innovation and have someone just continue the work that was started in developing grassroots curriculum, because when I came here, we were purchasing curriculum. We weren't tailoring curriculum to what our students needed. And that being said, there was a CFO and then there wasn't. And I was asked to step up, and I did it proudly because the work needed to continue. In doing that, going back to the point of our work matching our compensation, I can sleep at night saying when I looked and I compared with all of our surrounding districts, we are actually not. As a deputy superintendent at the top, we're mid-grade, even with what is approved in there. So in saying that, I don't think that it is anything unreasonable to have a deputy superintendent who is responsible for half of the areas in the school district to ask for a different pay grade for a deputy. It is common practice in other school districts. It just wasn't common practice here in Judson ISD. And whether this happens or not, you are correct. I won't go anywhere because I am committed to this work, Mr. Macias. But I am also committed to ensuring fair wages for the work that is being done. And
And-
so that being said,
I appreciate that. I know Ms. Gosh actually looked into this. What were the districts in the surrounding areas, and did they have a separate pay grade for deputy?
yes.
Can you speak into the microphone?
Yes, they do. They have separate, 2 that we've looked at. One at Southside is one of the ones. They have a different pay grade for the deputy superintendent. Northside ISD has a different pay grade for those positions. And there's quite a few others that are available
SAISD,
for that.
Shirley
So-
Cibolo, Southwest, Southside, they do have a different pay grade for a deputy.
And it's not lost on me that when I was a deputy, I knew that none of the surrounding districts had the deputy in the same pay grade as the assistant.
Yeah, and it's not on me as well. Ms. Stanford?
I appreciate y'all sharing what you shared, but it also comes to my mind that there's just a perception out there that teachers work really hard, they're face-to-face with our kids, and we really want them to be well-paid too, and they're not able to sit here face-to-face and make their case on a personal level like y'all can. And so I want to just advocate for them. I would really like to see us consider amending our pay grade for the teachers. I'm just going to add that in right now. I want to put that on the table and look at another 1 to 2%. I just want to see what the numbers would look like. And I want to advocate for them because they do go elsewhere. And I'd like to see that stopped, even if we become a little higher than other districts, if that's what we need to do to pull more our way. I'd like to see more come to Judson
Yes, ma'am.
and stay here. I know money's not the only reason people go or stay. I know that's not the case, but I certainly would like to do more for them.
Ms. Ryan?
See, this is why I said HR people can't put faces next to compensation. Yes, and part of the challenge with the history is that the deputy title was very ceremonious because everyone was on the same pay scale. So it didn't matter if we had 1 deputy, 2 deputy, or let's call 7 of you deputies. It didn't matter because everybody was getting the same paycheck. So that's why we've had a history of 2. But all the districts you listed that are our size, you just listed, they all have 1. The only one that's got 2 is double our size, and the only one that's got 3 is quadruple our size. But it didn't matter before because everything was the same pay scale. And I'm definitely not
But
against.
I want to correct. I know for a fact that when Ms. Barra and Ms. Robinson were deputies, they were not in the same pay scale. when Dr. Nelson and
That
Louis
was way
Rodriguez
before my
were
day.
deputy, I know, but what I'm
only
trying to
got-
say
I
is
only got
they
5
got
years of pay
paid.
documents.
I mean, Ms. Canoyer and Mr. Macias, no, they were in different pay grades.
Yeah.
So to say that they've always been in the same pay grades a misnomer. I think that's something as of late.
Yeah, so the last 5 years, they've been in the same pay grade. So I am definitely not against
And
a
they did,
deputy
right.
being a different pay grade, but I would like to make sure what that pay grade should be. So, I always use Comal as our benchmark because they're literally the exact same student population. They have more high schools than us, they're bigger in size than us, but they have the same amount of students. So when I see their one superintendent being paid a rate that is $15,000 less than what we've now put 2 of them at, I just want to make sure that we have adequate market data to support. I don't know where we got that dollar amount from. Like, where do we pull that daily rate from for midpoint and beginning? Because it doesn't seem consistent.
So our financial advisor, by the way, my apologies for not introducing our financial consultant that we've been working with. His name is David Anderson. I do know him. I used to work in Comal
Yes.
ISD, and he served as the deputy superintendent in Comal ISD as well as the CFO there.
There you go, and there was only one of
And
you,
he's
right?
willing to share.
Were you in a different pay grade?
How much
Yes.
did you?
Yeah. No, there was only one deputy superintendent. Now, we did not, it was for the operations and finance side of the house, but my salary for the last few years was in the 170 range. And
We don't have anyone
I
close
was
to that.
underpaid.
Not according to your website.
Well,
He's
I'll
telling
show
you
you
what
my
he-
pay stubs if you'd like to see.
Yeah, no,
But,
when you pull up
and according to
compensation on their website.
TASB study, it was under market value.
Okay. Yeah, because they pull up as 121 on.
It only shows
But
the
it only
minimum.
shows the minimum in the pay scale. Our pay scale shows min, mid, and max, and a lot of other districts don't show the entire range.
Oh, yeah, so
they're
I'm
just
sorry,
showing
looking at the
minimum.
min for what we put in ours for minimum starting and what Comal has for minimum, we're off by 15,000 on the 0 pay range. So I just,
They're
and again,
saying-
this goes back to, we have so much work to do on this document.
Yes, ma'am.
And we don't have what we need to fix this document, because it's not just a pay study. It's what I emailed you guys about, which is the TASB staffing survey, which looks at, of the 30 coordinators, are all the 30 coordinators in the right position? Should we have 30 coordinators for a school our size? And there's just so much work. And I watched NEISD's board meeting, and I got to talk to Dr. Maka and their board president this week too, which is they committed a year to fixing this. A hard, solid year by line, by individual. And that's what needs to be done, because there is so much stuff that is messed up on these.
And
But keep in mind too, they also, and Dr. Maka committed to next year, he's going to cut another 10 million out of his budget, inefficient. No, he doesn't use the word cut. He's going to find 10 million inefficiencies, which is much better wording, because cutting freaks everybody out type thing. But they did that, which is what I think we've talked about doing. We got to go find, 4 million inefficiencies next year within Judson. And they did that, and that board committed to a $58 million deficit budget, and they only have 175 in their fund reserve at the end of this year. Huge, huge risk, for them to use, a third of their fund reserve in a deficit budget. And they did that to get to 4% for their teachers and 6% to their paras on the commitment of their superintendent that I am going to go be more efficient. We have gotten bloated. We've been piecemealing things together. We're not going to do that anymore. So, we have that same amount of work to do that what NEISD has started to do and is going to continue to do next year.
And similarly to your point, Ms. Ryan, that's what we've asked for too. Give us this year so that we can conduct salary studies. The salary study that you mentioned that we shared with you again is something that was shared with this board. And whether this board chose to take any action or not, you can go back and see for yourself. So that salary study was presented to the board. The board chose to take or adopt the compensation plan with those recommendations or without those recommendations. We're asking you to provide us that year so that we can bring in salary study that is now more currently updated with a market value. We know that cost of living has changed since COVID. So we're asking you for that opportunity to make it right. And that's what we're doing right now, one position at a time.
Well, and again, just so everyone's clear, we have asked, and you said you will do, and I think my colleagues have heard that. So that's certainly something that will be continuing. There's no way we're going to be able to fix everything in 1 month or 2 months or one budget cycle. This is definitely a compounded issue that we'll address. So thank you for that. And like I did when I spoke with Ms. Ryan, she does have the ability to now take this information, just like all of us, and decide what she wants to do when we talk about this on the 22nd. I also wanted to say I wanted to be, cognizant of time, and I know that we certainly can talk forever. So I'm going to be saying we're about 15 minutes away from wrapping up our meeting. So if there's anything critical that we need to ask related to the budget, I would say, colleagues,
about
is there
asking, yeah.
anything that you want to tackle so we can have it on record? Ms. Stafford?
Yes. Yes.
Can I ask something that wasn't actually presented in
If
this
it's related to
paperwork?
the budget, sure.
Right, and it's being presented next Thursday.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering about the cut in the athletic department. I did email that question. It looked like, and I don't have the paperwork from the meeting, but the budget looks like it's going down by just under $500,000.
So the athletic department budget allocation currently is 2 million. It's a little bit over
Right,
2 million.
right.
And last year, their department allocation was 1.9 million.
Right, 1.9 to 2.387, I think. Something like that. It's, that's,
Okay, say that again. I'm sorry, I heard
it's
something.
going to 1.9.
Correct.
No. it
No,
went to one.
the agenda item is
No, no.
asking for 2.387 million, but I think there's a highlighted number that says 1.9.
So
So
1.9 is their new year budget allocation. Ms. Amanda, correct me if I'm, and Amanda is our Director of Finance.
And the prior year was
Their prior year was 2 million. I'm sorry.
2 million.
See that? There was an amendment made because we transferred a cheer budget from fine arts to athletics. And so that was an amendment that occurred mid-year. Can you think of any other amendments that were made? Those were the only ones.
So when I look at that agenda item, you're asking for board approval for 2.387. That's what is being asked. It's on the recommendation of that particular agenda item. But that yellow highlight that says 1.9 is the part that Ms. Stanford is alluding to. So when we pass this motion, it's going to be for 2.3
I
million.
apologize, sir. Yes, the over 50K item, is that the
Yes,
one you're
that's
referring to?
exactly the one
Thank
we're
you.
referring to.
That one is being resubmitted. What she shared was the actual department allocation that is incorrect. So we spoke with Ms. Corrales today, and she is resubmitting only those items that, when you add up all of the commodities, end up being over 50K. And so as far as her budget allocation for her department, it's still very similar to what it was last year.
Please let her
Yes.
speak. Can you explain the different codes or the functions?
Yes, because when you're talking to me right now about, the athletic budget, I'm thinking the whole budget, the whole 36,
Yeah.
the fund account, 181, and allocated in there is, we're going to budget 6.7 million. So that's salaries, that's the 6,200 accounts, which is their professional development, professional contracted services, as well as their supplies and their miscellaneous.
That's everything.
Yes. So what I saw on the last budget, I guess the prior director of finance set up said that the budget for last year or this current year was 2,125,000 or something like that. I think I wrote it down there. And then this year it's at 1.9 million. So athletics alone, and that is not the salaries, that is all the other expenses that are not salary. So that drop,
Added everything, the salaries and.
yes, so that drop is not really big of a difference, that 1.9 to the 2 million. It's like 100,000.
Yes, ma'am.
So my concern is, and I mentioned it at our last budget talk, is what has happened with the need for buses and the cost for buses, and I think that's what's reflected here when I looked at it. So how are we going to compensate for the fact that we still need those charter buses, and they're not getting any cheaper with, I'm sorry, OPEC is not, they're cutting our throats. So, how does that make sense that we're budgeting less when we spent more last year and we're not changing that, or are we?
We are changing that. We spoke with Coach Corrales today, and she stated that she didn't want to use charter buses for local area games. They were chartering to go to Harlandale. They were chartering to go to close football games. She said that they can use the coaches and buses to get, in the yellow buses, to get to those games. Now, where we will have to continue with our chartering is that we don't have the capacity in our bus drivers right now to do our routes after school, finish quickly, and then get them to a football game before halftime, because we have to finish the routes. So we'll have to continue with charters in those capacity. Now, any trip that we make with a football team or anybody that goes over 90 miles, we contact the charter system. But we won't be doing charters for local areas. But the concern last year was that, well, if the band and the dance and the cheer are on charter buses, then why can't the football team be on a charter bus? Well, we have the reason that they were on a charter bus is because at that same time, we're still running routes. And we don't have the capacity for people to come back and drive those buses. Now, what we're going to do over the course of the next year, and we talked about this as a district, we're going to go back to the band director. We're going to go back to the cheer sponsor. We're going to go back to the dance team leader or sponsor and say, or teacher, and say, we need you to get your CDL as well. And then once they get that done, and it takes time, but keep in mind, once people get CDLs, a lot of doors open. Because people want people with CDLs. But we're going to get them certified, and then once we get them certified, they'll be able to do the same. Because any basketball coach or any of the other coaches, we have the bus capacity. We just don't have the driver capacity. There is a shortage of CDL bus drivers in the state of Texas. So we're working on trying to correct that, but we don't see it as an issue. In addition, we assured her, don't have any concerns about charter buses or busing for the year. If ever there's a situation that comes up, we will make an amendment to the budget. We'll come back to the board and say, hey, we need to pay for this in addition. But it shouldn't be a concern about, we're not, her budgets in other areas, she felt like we're at capacity. When she walked out of the room today, I think that I felt that she felt supported. I would ask the cabinet to give some feedback on that. Mr. Guidry, she works in your department. How did you feel that Coach Corrales responded?
She did come by earlier, and that's exactly what we spoke about. But I know the biggest thing was that Dr. Fields mentioned to her was it would not be an issue if at the end, if they needed buses, because we considered playoff games, right? Because we know during playoff games, we got and they're going to go deep. They're going to go deep. So if there's a bind, yeah, right, they will go deep. If there's a bind, we're going to support her. There was no hesitation without that. So she did leave. She did leave satisfied.
And to Ms. Ryan's point, you said we're going to cut athletics. We're not necessarily cutting them. What we're saying is that if the capacity comes up, we're there to meet it. One of the things that they always do is they budget for long runs in the playoff in all capacities. Exactly. But they didn't have a long run at some schools in the playoff in some capacities, but they were budgeted for it. So it's not always a situation where because we budgeted them, they needed the money. It was, we budget to be prepared, but it's not always a requirement. But we are there to support them if the need arises. Yes, ma'am.
So are we going to help those teacher, coaches, band, whoever, get their CDLs?
Yes, ma'am, we are. We're going to look at opportunities like we get a long-term sub to go in, and then they just go to the class, you know what I mean, all day, every day for 2 weeks to get it done. They don't have to go after school or make time for it. We try and get them to get that accomplished because we need it. But there'll be different things that we do to try and make sure that that gets accomplished. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not, it's not lost on me that we may go to someone and say, hey, we need you to get your CDL. And yeah, yes, ma'am.
Well, I have two real quick questions.
Yes, sir.
Just last year, we had an influx of bus drivers come and speak with us and talk about compensation. So are we in a good position with bus salaries and all that this year? Competitive and all that stuff?
I've felt like we were. I would have to defer to Ms. Davis again, but I remember one of the things that we did, it was either last year or the year before, we gave a huge increase to our bus drivers to be more in better competition with local area districts. So much so that we had people leaving Northeast to come to Judson because we paid more.
And the other one is the police positions. We know how important that is. Obviously, we'll talk more about that in the weeks to come. But just that the compensation with our competing district.
I would tell you we need some work there. I've been shown comparisons with, now it depends on who we're comparing with.
Sure.
Some of the areas like Edgewood and Southside, and they pay more competitively. I think there's a reason for that, for different reasons. But definitely, I think we can do better in terms of our compensation with the police officers. But again, I'm trying to leave that to a survey audit to come back as opposed to pick and choose and say this one or that one.
And that's what I'll tell my colleagues as well. We may be coming to a point where we're going to approve this budget on the 22nd because we need to, by law, approve it. But the ability to amend, add, modify is a continuance.
Yes.
And so it's a living document. So I implore you to still do your work, still ask the questions, still kind of get to that point where we can actually come and continue to work on it. And then we will do program reviews early next year, starting in February, where we're looking at each department so that we can have a better sense before we get to this point, and we're trying to cram all this together.
Yes.
Plus, this board's going to be together next budget cycle, so we won't have
Long time.
elections to contend with, so we all should be experts by it. Any final comments or questions? Ms. Ryan?
Two things since we have to wrap up. I think I had emailed you about this. I think the athletics budget came into my mind because I know we had talked last week about getting these more detailed, like how do we get to 6.7 million on the co-curricular line? Like there's a bunch of things that go into that. So it was awesome that this athletic budget was in one of the other things, and I just happened to get to it because we talked about us being able to know anybody who goes up or down, you know, across our district. So if athletics is going to go from 2.1 down to 1.9, us just understanding what that means. Did they have a big purchase and we're not doing it next year? Or we're not doing charter buses local? Or have we told a department, you have to do less than what we're cutting? What are we not getting out of that? And seeing some of the increases, like Dr. Toppin's buying a bunch of sashes for graduation gowns. No, we were talking about that beforehand. You know, so that we can get our CCMR numbers up type thing is I want to see where you're asking us to put resources so that we can compare that against the, you know, the board goals and academic outcomes and social emotional outcomes. So if we can see something more detailed before Thursday so we can look through some of those sub-budgets and just realize where we're going up and down, because it looks like we're going down in athletics, which freaks me out a little bit, but as long as I know why, we're going to be good. The other thing is that, you know, I'm super excited we found more money, because we keep, I mean, Miss Davis, give her a metal detector out on the beach in Port Aransas, because she is finding money. Again, so I was excited to see that our deficit for this year went down another $4 million, because, you know, I think the CFO and director are going through and refining all of this. So I love seeing 4 million more there. I love that even with all of these, or many of these changes, we're still now down to a $13 million deficit budget. And remember, that's a 13 million worst case scenario. And I love the way Northeast ISD and Northside briefed theirs, which is they briefed that worst case scenario budget number, but they actually briefed their board on a forecasted number. They tell them reality, you're not going to be 13 million deficit. They somehow, through all of their history doing this, they tell them the no kidding, what they think the no kidding number is going to be. So if our worst case right now is looking 13 million, well, we know we're off by 20-something million every year at least. That means we're sitting really good. So that finding of money to get an extra 1% for teachers or 1% for our auxiliary, because that's where all our vacancies are according to the HR chart. We're not short up in admin. We're not short, looking at Ms. Nava's at least preliminary report for Thursday night, is if we found a little bit more money, because we can do 1% for paras and teachers at a cost of $2 million. So if we found $8 million this week and we found $11 million last week, we found $20 million since we passed COA 4, it really does look like we can apply 2 more million and get another whole percent for those people who are on the ground, in the classroom, in the bus, handing out food, truly those frontline workers that are with our kids every day. And I think it sends the right message too, because while we see it as a correction in the pay plan to get everybody to the 226 days they're working, let's remember how things play on the media. That plays out as a 6% pay increase, but teachers only got 3. It doesn't matter, they were already working the days. Remember, perception is everything. They don't care that you were already working the days. So making it look like we're giving an effort in all areas, not just up at central admin, not just principals and instructional leadership, make it look like everyone, is appreciated for what they do, and we're doing what we can, and be patient with us for next year. We're going to go back and we are going to realign every single one of these pay scales. So if you're that 27-year teacher who's 5,000 lower than Shirt Cibolo's pay scale for a 27-year teacher, don't worry about it. I know we promise a lot, but we really are going to go back and we really are going to fix that next year.
One thing I learned at SLI this weekend, I talked to one of the financial instructors after the class, and he told me that Northeast does what they name it a sweep in their budget, and I wouldn't call it that because that sounds like you're brushing money away. I would put some other, but what they do is they take the percentage of unfilled positions that is constant every year, some percentage of that, and they add it back in at the bottom so that their fund balance isn't continuing to grow. They have a number that adjusts the entire budget so that they're more realistic based on what actually happens. And I thought that was something we could consider doing. I guess it's pretty common, because but I don't know why we don't do it, but.
I'm not saying that we don't. I would say there were several things that were mentioned. First, we will put down big changes, a list in all the areas. I would tell you that what we would like to go to is, I don't know if some of the board members who have been here a little bit longer, we used to have people come in on Saturday along with their cabinet representative and say, hey, these are all the areas, this is what their budget's going to be, this is how we budgeted it out. Do they have any other concerns? And Chief used to be in here on Saturday going through it with us as well. That way all the board members are in on it, and most of the important directors will be there, as well as the assistant superintendents and the deputies. We will go through and make a list. We'll put down small rationale for some of those changes, but big changes, not $30,000 or $40,000 changes. We're going to be looking at bigger areas. I would say that the last thing that you spoke about was we found this and we found that. I would ask that as we go forward, please don't think that what we're proposing is a illusion of what we think is going to happen. The ESSER money's going away. Money to move places and not be accountable for aren't going to necessarily be there. And I can tell you that's not how we as a team operate. We will give you the raw, uncut facts. We're not trying to show anything different from what we propose to be the real deal as we go forward. And that's how it will always be. We want to be as transparent as possible. I'm not trying to say that at any time that wasn't the case. I'm telling you going forward, we're not tricking. We're not putting stuff places and hiding it or anything. We are giving you the upfront. And I would ask you to give us a year to go through this, and then we can make some educated moves. To continue to talk about making moves without knowing what's going to happen going forward is, I think it's disingenuous. So that's where I stand on it. But I do want you to know that in the areas where we're finding that we may have over budgeted, we were not a part of that process where it was over budgeted. But as we find it, we are coming back saying, board, this is what we have, and we are adjusting our numbers and being as realistic as we can with how we think that we're going to fan out at the end of this year and what we're going to have for funds going into next year. Did that make sense?
It did, and I'll go ahead and bring
Yes,
it
sir.
to a close. I just want to make sure, Ms. Canoyer, do you have any final comments? So again, thank you for that. That was good feedback. The last thing to, I guess, add to that is, as a board, we're part of the team, right? So we'll work collectively together with your administration. And then we've also discussed the idea of the internal audit coming in and helping us, because a lot of the analysis you do, it falls on you to do it when we can actually have an internal auditor do that work for us. So all of that's coming as we go through the year. But I just want to say thank you, Dr. Fields, and to your staff for being here, spending some time, and to my colleagues for participating. I now call the meeting to adjournment at 8:10.
Thank you, sir.
We're done.
Thank you.